One claims it's the company's only chance for survival.
Atari has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The 31-year-old
AWA presents the difference. Kodak is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and welcome to the 25th episode of Bankrupt. Soaring above the Pacific Islands of Hawaii was once one of the largest airlines to serve the state. Aloha Airlines was born from very humble beginnings and grew to become a pretty large US carrier. I personally remember becoming aware of the airline from their astonishing 1988 landing after part of the fuselage was ripped off one of their 737s mid-air. But of course, there's so much to this company's revered and storied past. So let's take a look at what happened to this beloved airline and why it ultimately declared bankruptcy. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. Use code BRIGHTSUN at the link below to get 60% off annual plans. It began with a Hawaiian businessman named Rudy F. Tong Sr. when he started the charter airline Trans-Pacific Airlines. He started it shortly after the war in 1946 to compete with Hawaiian Airlines, a company which was essentially operating as a monopoly in the inner island markets. Tong purchased war surplus DC-3s, hastily equipped them with bucket seats, and began operations. Tong particularly emphasized great customer service though, pioneering in-flight entertainment with live hula dancing and ukulele playing from stewardesses. Over time, the airline would grow as a competitive carrier, providing the much-needed inter-island service with low fares. Finally, in 1949, the company received its temporary certificate to operate as a real scheduled carrier. And through the 1950s, they focused on discounted fares, flying locals as well as tourists between the islands, particularly catering to the growing tourism from the Japanese. Locals and tourists alike loved the carrier, and it affectionately became known as the People's Airline and the Aloha Airline. In fact, that latter name stuck. In 1950, the airline, now made up of 5 DC-3s, was now going by TPA, the Aloha Airline. And finally, in 1958, after new investors came in, the name was officially changed to Aloha Airlines. President Dwight D. Eisenhower had officially signed their permanent operator certificate by this point, and with new aircraft added to the fleet, like the Convair 340, the airline had already transported more than 1.2 million passengers over its life. The 1960s and 70s would be a tremendously large era of growth for the company. Not only would they go public on the stock market in 1960, but they would also take delivery of their first jet-powered aircraft, the BAC-111. It made them the first airline to serve the inter-island market with jet power. In fact, they heavily advertised these new planes with their Rolls-Royce turbines everywhere. With Aloha seeking even more growth, with plans to become a true jet-only airline, they would place orders for the fairly new and advanced Boeing 737-200. The only problem was that Hawaiian Airlines was also adding a lot of capacity to their fleet. With both airlines operating short-haul, high-frequency service between the islands, they were flush with seats that they couldn't always fill. Both airlines were seeing falling revenues, and in 1970, a merger was being proposed to bring the two companies together. This plan never went through though, and following the Airline Deregulation Act, which finally affected Hawaii, new low-cost airlines like Mid-Pacific Air began challenging Aloha's already low fares. This price war came at a bad time too, as fuel prices were rising and the nation was in a recession. Both major Hawaiian carriers were feeling the pain of all of this, Aloha especially. By 1982, Aloha was claiming to have been losing a staggering amount of money, at least $1 million in December alone. Following the introduction of a frequent flyer program, the airline would test out a big expansion. They would lease out a wide-body DC-10, name it Aloha Pacific, and introduce long-haul routes to Guam and Taipei. They would test this out for only a short time though, as they just couldn't compete with other mainland carriers. The company would instead pivot to becoming a higher quality niche carrier for the inter-island routes, while during the evenings they would fly cargo service, a division that would actually later prove very successful. By 1986, the company was actually under threat of being taken over by a Dallas-based private equity firm. But corporate management would take them private, and in doing so, would successfully fend off private equity. As the airline began service across the ocean to Christmas Island and purchased another airline, renaming it to Aloha Island Air, in 1988, another major event would shake the airline. Aloha Airlines Flight 243, a routine 35-minute flight from Hilo to Honolulu, would take off with 95 souls on board. After reaching its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, the 737 would suffer a catastrophic decompression event involving a large part of the fuselage being torn away from the aircraft. This left passengers exposed to the open sky at high altitudes, and left the still flying aircraft only held together by the lower fuselage. Captain Robert Schornsteimer and First Officer Madeline Tompkins immediately initiated an emergency descent, and with a critically damaged passenger aircraft, they diverted to Maui's Kahului Airport. Astonishingly, with a failing left engine, damage to the vertical and horizontal stabilizers, along with no indication they had gear locked in place, they made a successful landing in Maui. The immediate aftermath was nothing short of carnage to the aircraft and its passengers, 65 of whom reported injuries, 8 of them serious. While all passengers were buckled in during the decompression, sadly, Chief Flight Attendant Clarabelle Lansing, who had been with the company for 37 years, was standing in first class when it happened. She was swept out of the aircraft and never found. The incident made international news, putting Aloha Airlines on the map for many. It was one of the most unbelievable events to have ever happened in commercial aviation history. Not only was this truly an unbelievable catastrophe, but the fact that the pilots managed to land the aircraft was nothing short of a miracle. Of course, the aircraft was deemed a total loss, and it was soon discovered that Aloha Airlines had been operating 2 of the highest flight cycle 737s in the world. With such a high utilization of their aircraft flying the inter-island service, plus the mix of the corrosive saltwater environment they had been flying in, it was a deadly combination. Aloha was criticized for their deficient maintenance, which led to the inability to spot the serious metal fatigues in the fuselage. Despite the incident and the ensuing good and bad press, Aloha was actually profitable once again. That same year, the company posted revenues of $124.7 million. Not only were they bringing in money, but by 1990, they had also surpassed Hawaiian Airlines in market share with their inter-island service. The company really was loved by this point. With their robust route system for locals and tourists alike, friendly customer service, and quite beautiful liveries and overall aesthetic, the airline was a staple of Hawaiian transportation. By the year 2000, Aloha had just taken delivery of their new 737-700s, which now meant these aircraft were certified to fly further over the ocean. With a new livery introduced, the airline began flying direct flights to the mainland. First to Oakland, California, then to a bunch of new destinations like Sacramento, Las Vegas, San Diego, Burbank, and even Vancouver. Aloha was now operating around 120 daily flights, and despite the growth across the airline as a whole, as well as the places they flew to, there were looming financial troubles ahead. Following the September 11th, 2001 attacks in New York, air travel saw a pretty sizable drop, especially with tourists. Hawaii was hit hard by this, and Aloha, as well as Hawaiian Airlines, both felt the pressure. Once again, talks would be engaged with a potential merger under one company called Aloha Holdings. Ultimately, these merger talks would be called off once again, as both companies received loans from the government to continue operations, Aloha receiving $7.7 million alone. In an effort to shave off even more expenses, Aloha's employees agreed to a 10% pay cut to save the company, saving nearly $40 million by 2005. Clearly, things were pretty dire for the airline. Despite another $45 million loan from the government, with rising jet fuel prices and the SARS panic, it was just too much of a financial burden to bear. As quarterly losses mounted, on December 30th, 2004, Aloha Airlines filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This followed their competitor Hawaiian Airlines, who had also filed for bankruptcy a year prior. Aloha was poised to restructure rather quickly, though, and exit their bankruptcy by summer of 2006. In doing so, they would cut their premium offerings, lay off employees, and renegotiate aircraft leases, all in an effort to make the company more lean and competitive in the very harsh industry. While they would secure private funding and while their public outlooks were positive, Aloha was still fighting for survival. Small low-cost carrier Go, a competitor offering low inter-island fares, was deep in a price war with Aloha. Industry experts claimed that their $39 one-way fares were not sustainable for the brand new carrier, and were thought to have been a way to outposition Aloha and ground them for good. In fact, Hawaiian Airlines brought them and their parent company, Mesa Air Group, to court after an email was revealed by Mesa's CFO reading, quote, "If we assume Aloha stays in the market and in business forever, this project makes no sense. We definitely don't want to wait for them to die. Rather, we should be the ones who give them the last push." This was devastating for Aloha. By the end of 2006 alone, they had posted over a $40 million loss. With the brutal price war going on in the inter-island market and continued rising fuel prices exacerbated by the looming US housing crisis, the struggling company just couldn't hang on. For the second time, on March 20th, 2008, Aloha Airlines filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. While the company did have investors and even a buyer who was getting pretty close to a large acquisition deal, the price of jet fuel just continued to climb and investors began pulling the plug. 10 days later, and without any further funding, Aloha announced that they would shut down all passenger operations by the end of the month, effectively shutting down the entire company. After 61 years in operation, on March 31st, 2008, Aloha Airlines was completely shut down. As the corporation went into Chapter 7, all of their assets were put up for auction. To the devastation of many of their passengers, but mainly employees, there was little buyer interest with the passenger side of the company. By this point, it was becoming clear that the airline that people once loved really was over. Only the cargo and contract service division was bid upon, ultimately being sold to a Seattle-based logistics company, Saltchuk. They would package the division into a brand new company called Aloha Air Cargo, and began operations in May of 2008. That company actually still exists today. As for the Aloha name, however, well, it was revealed that Mesa, the owners of Go Airlines, wanted to purchase the Aloha name and rebrand their company to it. Of course, this enraged many of the former employees, and the deal was blocked by a bankruptcy judge. Instead, the brand name went to a Los Angeles company in 2011 for around $1.5 million. Though it doesn't seem like they've done anything with it. In the end, the collapse of Aloha was a devastating reality for passengers and employees alike. Today, there is very little left behind of Aloha's former dominance in the Hawaiian aviation markets. Just memories and the retired, scrapped planes in the mainland desert. While the company was founded as a carrier to add competition into the island markets, it was ironically even more competition, some which might argue had nefarious intentions, that ultimately killed this beloved company. It turns out that after major world events and rising operational costs, there just wasn't enough room in the relatively small market for two large carriers. Certainly not enough room for two large carriers plus low-cost airlines trying to squeeze them out. Hawaiian Airlines, the stronger of the two, ultimately made it out alive, though it too took heavy losses during this time. But regardless, many who flew with Aloha still remember it fondly. And no matter what its wider public legacy may be, it will forever go down as an important part of Hawaiian aviation history. Data breaches happen all the time. Just recently, Qantas had 6 million customers' data get breached. The point is that your data is never safe, and that thousands of companies are collecting and distributing your data. I know my data has been leaked through one of the many common data breaches from companies I trusted. And even just going about my daily browsing online puts my personal data at risk. It's something that genuinely worries me, especially as online privacy gets weaker and weaker through the years. So when this data is collected by malicious brokers, you have the right to remove it from the internet. Of course, putting in the work to actually do this would take hundreds, if not thousands of hours to do. And that's why I'm excited that Incogni is sponsoring this video. Incogni makes the process of submitting requests and having your data removed from the internet extremely simple. Since I've signed up, they've completed over 178 data requests on my behalf, saving me over 133 hours if I were to manually do it all myself. I can rest a little easier knowing that Incogni is working on my behalf, and now all of these companies don't have my data anymore. Plus, it's so easy to do so. You just sign up, grant them your permission to remove data on your behalf, and they just make your digital footprint a lot more safe and secure. They've also now introduced a custom removal feature. That means if you come across a website that is containing your private data, you can send that to Incogni and one of their agents will take care of it for you. So to take back your personal data with Incogni, you can use code BRIGHTSUN at incogni.com/brightsun to get 60% off annual plans. Anyway guys, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.